Welcome to the Revenue Rewired podcast, hosted by StringCan Interactive's visionary CEO, Jay Feitlinger, and no-nonsense COO, Sarah Shepard. We're here to accelerate your revenue and give your marketing purpose. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Revenue Rewired. Hi, Jay.
Hello, Sarah.
Happy day. Awesome. Well, today's
Nice to see you
topic is
again.
super fun. Yes, it's good to see you too. We have been chatting about prizes and games because we just wrapped up some internal competition and neither one of us won, which was sad, but it's okay. We've got plenty more where those come from. However, there is one one game that brings us both joy to reminisce on, and I think it's probably a painful one for a lot of people, which is the claw machine. So I know when we talked about this recently, it gave you some PTSD a little bit about going and visiting. And I know for me, I actually gave up on that game as a kid. I just never could succeed. And I was like, you know what? I would rather go spend my money and get a handful of candy instead. So I went for the stale candy win. But it sounds like that is not how you approached it. But talk to us about this childhood story and how it ties into marketing.
Well, I think for me, I have some mixed feelings about, the claw machine, especially when you watch those funny videos of, somehow a little kid got through it and got all the prizes they wanted. Pretty genius. I didn't think about that when I was growing up. But I spent a fair amount of time in Atlantic City. My parents really enjoyed going there, and I've done a lot of time spent in arcades growing up, and I really did enjoy them. But something about the flashing lights and the sound of some of those games, like Claw Machine, is one that I typically would spend some money in, often with frustration. But it's funny. I have a good friend growing up that we loved to go to the mall and go to the arcade, and often we would spend money on that. And it was interesting. I attribute it when we think about like the work that we do, helping like heads of sales and marketing, similar to the example of using a claw machine, where you think about each prize being a lead. And so when I think about my friend when I was growing up, we had two very different perspectives on the claw machine. And I think even when I was younger, my brain was wired from a strategy perspective. And so the arcade we often went to actually had two claw machines and they had very different prizes in both. And so, I'd be spending all this time analyzing each of the claw machines, what prizes they had, and which ones I had a better chance of winning. And I would spend, I don't know, 10, 20 minutes just analyzing it and watching other people playing it and seeing what's working and what's not. Where my friend was more of an instant gratification person, and he just would run into there, put a quarter on, and let the claw drop and grab whatever he got. And he didn't care if it was a stupid plastic, weird toy, or it was a cool prize that he wanted. And so I think that's a fun analogy to often use when you think about marketing, which is why I think we often talk about that story. Is it does bring up a lot of interesting childhood memories, some good, some bad, especially when you've won. But for me, if I put, hard-earned money with my allowance and whatnot into the machine, and it came back with this stupid, plastic whatever toy, I actually would get more sad as if I didn't get a prize at all. And so I think there's different ways to think about it, but I'd love to think about what we do at StringCan from that perspective, where I think it really helps reframe the mind around the value we bring on, the strategy part, and then understanding that there is no guaranteed results, around how you're investing in playing games like that.
So then we've talked about the claw machine fallacy, which is the idea of putting in $1 and you're going to get a toy, right? But what you mentioned was something really interesting about you probably felt like you were more successful than your friend potentially because of you called it, would you say like analyzing, but it was really you were strategizing your prizes. And it's hearing some of these stories of your childhood, it becomes clear to me every week we record. I'm not surprised you're in marketing. Like, you were a marketer when you were 6.
Oh, that's hysterical. Well, I would say I was probably a good strategist. I don't know if I was a good marketer then, but My brain's always been wired that way, where I love to kind of think about, how things work and how to maximize investment. And I just always been thinking about stuff from that point of view. And it's funny now, Sarah, to your point, as I've been getting older, I have a very different perspective. And so again, when you're a kid, you don't think about, oh, I have X dollars. And again, obviously, claw machines, I'm amazed at how much more expensive video games are now. I'm aging myself here, but like I remember when these things were like 10 cents or a quarter. I went to an arcade a few years ago with one of my kids, and it's like $3 to $5 for some of these things now. And so what's funny is I often find myself thinking now, my gosh, I just gave you 20 bucks, and 4 minutes later you asked for more money. And I probably could have bought that prize that you eventually finally won for half the cost. But again, it's not about often the destination. It might be about the journey as well. I think there's a lot of fun in there. But yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of interesting stories growing up.
Well, what's interesting though is like in marketing, you talked about watching, other people play and picking which prize would bring the most value and your odds of winning. How does that translate in marketing? Like for our executives who might be listening, or our audience, when we're talking about this, kind of like put your dollar in and like get what you get when it comes out, if you get anything. And that's, I think maybe some of the frustration in marketing is like put in a dollar and then I maybe get a prize, a lead, or maybe I get absolutely nothing at all. So where is that, approach to the machine translating in marketing? Why is it so important?
Well, I think there's, like I alluded to in the beginning and intro, is the two aspects. Again, there's a lot of analogies we can go down around this or how it ties in what we do. But I think the two most obvious ones to me using that, machine, fallacy concept is the first part is the strategy, is making sure going in with the right intention of I have to figure out how to best use my investments to get the results. And then obviously, then the results part is tied to the prize, which again, usually either could be, from a marketing perspective, it could be generating the opportunity. From a sales perspective, it could be a qualified lead. And then for maybe like a true like chief revenue officer, it's about how this is translating into generating revenue for the bottom line. And so the comment you made before is one that I often find myself running into where, we have a lot of clients that are having some pretty big success. And they often, every year when we work with them, they create, larger BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goals for the next year or the next 5 years, whatever it might be. And they always want to grow. And so often it would be like, wow, string hand team, last year we spent $200,000 with you all and got X number of leads. Um, what if we doubled that the next year and spent $400,000? Can we get a guarantee that we'll get double the number of leads? And I think we are good risk takers, but we also are a partner and try to be very realistic around that. And unfortunately, similar to the claw machine, there are things out of your control. There are things that you can't even see. So again, unfortunately, if you go down the rabbit hole of looking into some of these like carnival game things, you'll often will find there's a fair number of scamming going on. And it's hard to see it unless you're standing right there on the other side of the counter. And so you don't know if the machine's potentially been rigged with it not going far enough, or the claw doesn't close close enough, or I've heard horror stories from other parents where things were like sort of like glued or velcroed in. Like even like the coin games, you look at some of that, I'm like, how is that tower not fallen yet?
Oh,
And if you look into it, some of these places are horrible where they'll actually glue the coins together in a weird way, like Eiffel Tower, and it's not going to fall. So I think again, the most important part of what we do typically is understanding the strategy because based upon your results, like I alluded to that parent comment, I think it ties in really well. As a parent now, there might be more effective ways to get you the results you want than just sticking your money in a claw machine and hoping the results are going to come out. And then the second part is back to the comment of if we double the budget, would that happen? Again, similar to the claw machine. You could spend, I don't know, let's say it's $2 a game now. You could say, I want to get five prizes, five leads, and I'm going to play, $10, $2 a game. there is no guarantee you'll get five, let alone even one. And that's the parts out of your control. There's seasonality, there's competition, there's timing, there's look at the market right now, there's tariffs, there's so much going on that unfortunately is out of your control. So the trick's going to be is how do you create a strategy that's going to confidently get you the best results possible? And then you're picking the right tactics to help support that, but in a very meaningful or intentional way to not guarantee you, but more realistically getting the results that you want.
Yeah, thinking about it from like if I'm on a sales team and your friend is feeding me all the garbage toys and I'm like, I don't want to play with any of these toys. And you're like, ooh, I got this one toy and it's so awesome. I'll be like, I'm on Jay's sales team because he's awesome. He gives me all the cool toys. I have to wait a while sometimes for the cool toy, but it always lasts a lot longer than the crappy toys your friend is is giving me if I'm a salesperson.
But you was funny on that. Like I have two brothers. I'm the middle child, probably no surprise, at least to you.
No surprise.
And
No.
I got really good at kind of reverse engineering some of these things growing up, like to the point where I almost can guarantee that if the machine was set up the right way and the prizes were organized in the right way, I would be like I'm guaranteed to get the results because I did spend time being a dork, and I would spend 10 20 minutes watching other people playing and losing their money and be like, oh, I could see how this would work better. But with my brothers, for example, they were more like instant gratification and they just wanted to get a prize. And so I know what my brothers liked. And so once in a while, if they won a prize that I wanted, I would make sure I understood what prize they would want and I would get that so I can do a trade with them. And make it seem like I'm a great brother. But end of the day, I just manipulated the entire situation.
And they're about to find
And
this out in this episode.
I hope they don't listen to this. That'd be
Yeah,
really
well, I'm going to
bad.
make sure I send it to them.
Please
But
don't.
it's funny you talked about too that you would wait. It's so surprising to me because, one of the things we struggle with and we try to speed up, but it really is something that it requires a lot of intentionality, which is the strategy piece. And, waiting that 10 to 20 minutes does yield a lot. And I think that's the strategy is it takes time to build a really good one. And you could totally there's two approaches, right? You can just start throwing money at stuff and seeing what sticks. But do you really have time for that or budget for that? If you do, cool, go for it. Make sure that the data is available to sift through it and find your results. But there's also another way, which does require a little bit of patience, planning, thoughtfulness, which is the strategy, so that you are then long term better suited to spend your budget on things that actually are going to, I think, give the team better data to get better, more quality leads down the line.
Yeah, 100% agree. And again, if we wanted to switch from the claw machine analogy, and I always love, as you know, using real estate analogies, when we remodeled and built onto our current home, when they were pouring the concrete pad, the actual wood framing showed up like 3 or 4 days earlier, which obviously was a surprise to me. But there was rain coming, and I was really freaked out about, the wood getting wet. And the guy's like, "Don't worry about it; it's not a big deal." But when the concrete was poured, I'm like, "Okay, so are you guys gonna start doing the framing tomorrow?" And he's like, "No, the concrete needs to cure." Or whatever he said to me. I don't understand some of that stuff, but it does tie in really well where often we'll meet with companies that, for example, heard about a success we had with another client and they really are eager to get going. And, they sometimes struggle with, my gosh, we have to, wait, 2 months to create a really proper comprehensive strategy. And often, without being condescending, my response will be is, how long have you felt that you honestly have had this problem where you haven't been getting the results that you were believing that you deserve, or should be getting? And often I'll hear it's been years. So I'm like, okay, look, I get it. We got to move quickly here, but wouldn't it be better to wait 2 months and make sure that we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's? So that way, when we pick the right tactics, we're doing it in the most effective way. So when we hit the ground running, you're getting the right prizes. And so once the strategy is done, of course, then you have no excuses. You got to move really quickly every month looking back and seeing what's working, what's not, and adjusting accordingly. But that's the area where I think, people expect that, okay, if I just, they'll call us and be like, we'll just dump $20,000 a month in Facebook ads and that'll help us get our goals because, you know, my daughter, who's a social media expert, just got out of college, believes that that'll be the solution to everything. And I think the right partner will push back and be like, well, Facebook ads might work, but that's a tactic. How we use it to connect the dots between you and your ideal client, and then the journey from when they see that ad, it's done in the right way where they're like really curious and they're clicking on it and the whole experience is really well thought out. That's the part that if you're changing the tire as you're driving and just launching a campaign and praying that if you just dump 10 bucks in the claw machine, you're going to get five prizes. It just unfortunately doesn't work that way until you have a really good system in place. And then you can have some confidence that, okay, if I do invest more money, yes, I'm probably not going to exactly get, if I 5x my budget, I might not get 5x the prizes, but you're very likely going to see a pretty awesome return because you've kind of already worked out the kinks.
Yeah, and I think it's worth it to try to work out the kinks as best you can. And strategy at least gives you some like bumpers to work within and say, this is what I believe to be true. And it really is very thoughtful, very detailed, very strategic and organized. And it really gives you, yes, this is good data. So we always talk about garbage in, garbage out. I think from then on, once you start executing the strategy, and this is where people, I think, go a little like, oh, I don't want to say off the rails, but maybe misguided is by executing without a strategy. You have to sift through a lot more crappy toys than you would if you had a strategy in place. And it just is a lot. Do you have that effort to spend? For me, it's all about efficiency. I would really rather be patient and wait a little bit longer to make sure that once I start it and execute it, the data that's now coming in, it might be a little slower because I'm more focused, but then I can really spend the time on refining like why is this a fantastic lead and then walk through the whole process and follow it through its entire life cycle, the customer's cycle in my business and find out where gaps might exist versus if you just kind of dump everything and spray and pray in there, it's really hard to follow that any customer journey, I think, at that point, because one, are you even following the right customer journeys? It's just an energy. Nobody has that kind of time and energy and resource right now to be doing that.
Yeah, I think again to your point there, I know that there's external factors going on, like a look at the economy, for example, that it's frustrating. It's like when you work for an amazing organization that people can really benefit from. I get the need for speed. I've been there myself many, many times. It just there needs to be a rational thought around let's just do our due diligence. And I'm not saying spend 6 months, but I think you got to spend at least a month or two on just really dissecting, step number one, do we even have our positioning in the right place? Because if you're trying to speak to everyone, you're speaking to no one. And so I think, you got to invest the energy in looking at the organization, look in the mirror and be like, what do we need to button up here? Because why, just stick your money blindly into a machine, and, expect to get amazing results out? You're going to get some stupid plastic toy that's going to fall apart after, one time playing with it, which honestly is the most frustrating thing in the world, especially if it's a toy that you think you're going to want. And that's happened to me, unfortunately, way too many times. And so I just think you gotta slow down a little bit in the beginning and just dissect, where you are, where you want to go, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and then add in a layer to try to reduce some of the variables like the competition. There's so many amazing tools in the digital marketing space that we have the luxury of leveraging where we actually can see what competitors are doing at that point in time. Now, again, you have to keep doing that because you kind of want to zig when they zag. Because if you sound like everyone else, it's going to be really hard for you, especially in the digital world, to get someone to raise their hand and say, I'm interested, because if you sound like everyone else, it's going to be really confusing to understand how you're different than someone else and the value you can bring. And then it just ties in from there regarding what the tactics are going to be and then how to tell the right story. it's super exciting. Again, we've had numerous clients, as you know, where they are very eager, and I get why. Maybe they have a huge trade show coming up and they really wanted to be very well polished and prepared for it with not the marketing side, but also the sales side with things like collateral that will help them with. But, there has to be some level of patience with this because again, when that client, after being so eager and we deliver the plan, they're like, okay, now we see the value. Like we weren't even aware that half the problem was us, not us string cam, but us the client, where
Mm.
they had some internal things. Again, when you're inside the business and you're just going at a zillion miles per hour, it's often so hard to see some of the obvious things that a fresh pair of eyes like us would notice, because we often will uncover that yes, you have some marketing obstacles or opportunities, but more often than not, the problems aren't the marketing side. It's often on the handoff between marketing and sales. And then from there, how you're, retaining those opportunities. So you're seeing, lifetime value in that investment. So back to that toy analogy, like my youngest daughter, she actually got this amazing toy when she was younger. And 20 years later, she's still not 20, 18 years later, she still has that.
Oh,
But again, she barely plays with it. And it's like, bubble wrapped. But, that is ideal. It's like, how do you think about your client the same way, where you spend so much money on marketing and sales and nurturing them and bringing them on? You should invest the same amount of energy with keeping them, and protecting them and listening to them and improving your business and learning from them from that perspective. And it's just super exciting when you think about it from that point of view too.
yeah. And that kind of goes into our next piece, which was like, what makes a good toy? So you and I have kind of talked about crappy toys, but I would bet my idea of a toy might be different than your idea of a good toy. Like, I highly doubt as a young boy you would have wanted a Polly Pocket. I would have absolutely died to get a Polly Pocket, and you'd get like some gross sticky hand thing that you'd want to smack at girls or something like that. I'd be like, God, that's it's the lamest toy ever. So each business has their own version of like the cool toy, but how do you help define that quality? I mean, is it just the ICP, or the ideal customer profile? Like, how is it that they can go about finding the right signals and making all that work?
I love that, Sarah. Um, so you already, I guess, alluded to one part of it, which is the ideal client profile. Because again, back to how I played the claw machine, I literally would have that's the only toy I want in the stupid glass, aquarium thingy. Um, and so I think there is really defining that. But the way I think we do it different or more special that our clients really appreciate is we paint a picture around the pain point and motivation, some more psychographic based versus demographic based people. I know a lot of our competitors, or how I was taught, getting a marketing degree, I was always taught very much this demographic focus. And a lot of clients, as you know, will come to us and be like, our ideal client is 18 to 100. It's just like, oh my goodness, like that is a very different chapter in people's lives when you think about that kind of range. And so I think about it from the point of view, if you can really understand the ideal client and in what makes them tick and what they need to hear to be convinced that you might be the right solution, if you could really understand that and you validate that by doing qualitative and quantitative research, not only is it going to make your marketing efforts so much more powerful, where you feel like you're going to get a serious return and you're connecting with the people that would find most value, but then from the sales side, which you alluded to on the quality piece, the biggest frustration we often hear from our clients is when the sales teams get a higher quantity of leads, but they're all in their minds junk. They ghost them like we chatted about in a past show, or they're like, I don't remember filling out a form, or I have no interest in what you're offering. It's like if you could do a really good job at educating that person regarding what it would be like working with you all, then that lead comes into it already educated. And so now the sales team just needs to, validate it, make sure it's a fit on both sides. And that's the part. And so I think to your analogy, I think about this. So I don't think I ever told you that, but one of my favorite toys, which is gonna probably shock you, is remember that the Chinese finger thingy?
Ugh. The
So
finger trap,
everyone
the
hated
Chinese
it.
finger trap.
And
Yes.
I loved it. I don't know
Why?
why. I just think the idea, first of all, I'm a very claustrophobic person. So you would think I would absolutely hate it because I know people that are claustrophobic like me, like getting your fingers locked is almost like the handcuff thing. It causes instant sweat. But there's just something about that simplicity of that toy and the excitement it gives you for that couple seconds. But the fun analogy I thought about, or the example, is there was a toy that my brother loved. It was this weird blue, I don't know what it was, like a blue like a minion thing type of toy, like a little ball thingy, but it wasn't that. And it looked great. Well, the thing was manufactured horribly, and it was filled with all these insane little plastic bead ball things, not like the
Yes.
soft things that were hard. It was like a hard toy. Um, it wasn't properly sewed or something. I'll never forget uh, that he had it and then had it in one of his little bags, and the thing broke open somehow, and all the stupid little beads fell out. But the beads, when they interacted with water, got this really gluey, sticky substance. When he made that sticky comment, I remembered that. And so again, from the outside looking in, this thing looked awesome. It was cute, had these googly eyes that moved, and it was exactly what he wanted. He was super excited. And then it turned into a complete disaster because inside of it, it wasn't well thought out. And now in hindsight, I guarantee you the thing probably was full of asbestos or some other horrible cancer causing chemical. And so your point is like it's almost like remodeling a house. If you remove that drywall behind the scenes, you might find a freaking raccoon or mold or something in between. And so I think that's where the quality comes into play, where if you can really get into the head inside the ideal client and figure out what makes them tick and how you really can deliver value and you're purpose driven that way, not only is the marketing team going to be considered, heroes, but also the sales team is going to find major excitement in thanking the marketing team that they're actually having meaningful conversations.
Yeah, and I think remembering that not every prospect goes through the exact same process. Like they're all at different stages. And that I think does frustrate companies sometimes when they want to move fast is I don't want to have everything for every stage. But if you really want to make sure that you can educate them and that everyone does need a lot more reassurance, partly because we've all gotten a lot smarter and more discerning in our choices. And we have to kind of offer that to our prospects just like we would expect. Like you don't want to go buy a car and never, see anything online about the car, look at any reviews or pricing. Like we all do that with normal important things in our lives. Marketing is no different. Like you are selling a service, a product, whatever it is, and you want to make sure that you can give the best foot forward with all the information that you can at whatever stage your prospect is in, knowing that they will have a consistent experience and that the outcome, which is whatever your offering is, matches all of those experiences. I think that to me, that would be ideal.
Yeah, I think there is like if back to the strategy part, if you launch a campaign thinking it's the right tactic and you're not really sure what you're doing and why and what the results you're hoping for, I mean, it really is just blindly sticking money in a machine and hoping you get a prize. But that's where I think the strategy comes into play. What you're talking about here is one of the things that, as you know, we talked about on a past show was the whole kind of flow auditing discussion is take the time to really understand from the client's point of view, what would the experience be like once they find you? Are they landing on the website? And is it answering their questions? Is it making them the hero? I mean, I would say more often than not, one of the first things we see for our clients, our new clients, and low-hanging opportunities, is the messaging. Typically, most companies will talk about how wonderful they are and their features and benefits. And yes, that's important. But if you don't put the ideal client as the hero and really focusing on talking about, the benefits to how you're going to solve their problems versus how wonderful you are, that is something that's, again, hard to do if you're living inside the business. And so I think, again, if you take your time during the strategy phase and doing that comprehensive kind of 360 audit on the business, the market, your competitors, the audience, et cetera, you're going to see a much higher return once you start launching the marketing campaigns. to ensure you're buttoning things up, and everything from the email follow-ups, like how your salespeople are talking to people. It needs to be a consistent experience, similar to if you're going to visit Starbucks in Phoenix, Arizona, or in, New York. You go to Starbucks often because you know that it's going to be typically a consistent experience regarding the quality and the cost and that whole entire, experience.
Yeah, creating a consistent experience takes patience and time and resources and energy, but ultimately it builds versus distracting from one thing or another. You got to do it all well, and then it creates this awesome revenue generating machine, right? So that is a wrap actually for today's episode. First off, we would love to hear your traumatic childhood stories about the claw machine. So please email us podcast@stringcaninteractive.com, subject line claw machine, and we will read them on air. Maybe next time if we get any, that'd be
I
awesome.
love that. That's super cute. Oh my gosh.
But today we talked about strategy, its importance, and lead quality, and claw machines. And so we look forward to catching you guys at the next episode. And thanks, Jay. Great episode.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to the Revenue Rewired podcast. Send us your questions to podcast@stringcaninteractive.com and follow us for more insights to drive your business forward.